Hello, everyone. I'm Ravi Ramamurthy, Director of the Center for Emerging Markets here at Northeastern University. Welcome to all of you to the Nardone seminar series. We are delighted today to have Mohan Subramaniam, who's an Associate Professor of Strategy at Boston College's Carroll School of Management, speaking to us on a very interesting topic, the future of strategy. There's no one on the planet who should not be interested in that topic. Sweeping and important topic. And the talk is based on his forthcoming book with the same title, The Future of Competitive Strategy. And the subtitle is Unleashing the Power of Data and Digital forthcoming from MIT Press in the fall of 2022. So we are delighted we get a preview of that book even before it's out. We're in for a treat, I think. Mohan is going to talk for about 40 minutes and then open it up to Q&A. So I would suggest if you could please turn off your mics and we'll give Mohan a chance to present his ideas, and then we'll have plenty of time for discussion. Mohan, again, thank you. Welcome to Northeastern virtually, and over to you.
Thank you, Ravi, for that kind introduction. And it's an absolute pleasure to be here with you all today and share some of my thoughts on this upcoming book of mine. So some of you might know me from my previous work, which was largely around the areas of global strategy and the management of knowledge and innovation. Since the last 6-7 years, my focus has been exclusively on how industry incumbents, or who are also called legacy firms, can adapt to this changing digital world, find new sources of competitive advantage. So, and that is what, as Ravi mentioned, is encapsulated in this upcoming book. I've got a date now. It's apparently August 16th, and it was fun to see that Amazon, despite the fact that the cover has not yet been designed, but Amazon is up there with it for pre-booking orders and things. So it was a very nice feeling. So before we get into the future of competitive strategy, if we quickly review some of the traditional assumptions that we have always held, probably for the last 4 decades or so. One is an implicit understanding that the primary drivers of revenue are products. And by products, they're physical products, what Caterpillar sells, or services like what banks do or insurance companies do. But those are the things that generate revenues. Then we have a very important concept, which thanks to Michael Porter in the early 80s, talked about value chains, that how value chains are central in terms of how you determine how products are positioned. And most importantly, as all strategy people, competitive strategy people would swear by, is the structure of the industry or the characteristics of the industry that can amplify the power of products. Now, these we have held dear to us in a variety of different forms and nuances, but primarily we have held to these assumptions for a long time. But things are changing, as we can see, and the changes are coming about by a new genre or category of firms. And despite the ripples that you're seeing with Facebook today, but it is very clear that these kinds of firms, who we can call digital natives or digital titans, or these are the companies that are replacing some of the industrial titans of yesteryears as the most valuable companies in the world. And the thing is that for some time, we used to consider them as a separate category of firms and said that, okay, we know Microsoft, we know Google, we know Amazon, but we don't, when we are talking about industrial legacy firms, they are a different category. So for a long time, we have still held on to our prevailing assumptions without recognizing that there's some sea change in terms of the underlying premises by which competitive advantage can be drawn. And one of the things is the role of data, that these firms have shown that data is probably the most valuable resource in the world today. And not only that, that this value of data comes because of what they do in their digital ecosystems. And so neither is data new for us as legacy firms. And we do understand the idea of ecosystems. That is also not new. We know them as interdependencies and so on. But how do you take the proven concepts of what these digital titans have done and how do you make them apply to a vast majority of legacy firms is what my undertaking has been. And with that, there is some general sense of what this digital world is, but I'm trying to get into specifying certain models by which you can have new drivers of competitive advantage. And so for me, the future of competitive strategy for legacy firms is a shift of emphasis from products to data, and also recognizing how competitive advantage can come from digital ecosystems and not just from industries. So that's the driving premise of what I'm going to talk about today. And for this, there are three key inputs that I will focus on and which I will go through in this talk. One is that how do we understand data differently? Like I said, data is not new, but how you use data is different today. How do you understand the structure of digital ecosystems for legacy firms, not the Ubers and Amazons and Googles? What do digital ecosystems mean for a bicycle company or a water pump company or a Caterpillar or a bank or an insurance company? With the precision or with the depth that we understood industry structure. Now, I'm not saying that I'm going to give that just in this talk, but that is the general direction that I feel that competitive strategy should be moving. That we know a lot about industry structure. We don't know so much about digital ecosystems. And of course, if you think about this shift from products to data and industries to digital ecosystems, then there has to be a new perspective for competitive strategy. That's what I'm going to talk about in terms of what I think this direction should be, right? So the first input is about what is the new role of data? And again, what is new as I see it is this shift from what I call episodic data to interactive data. So episodic data is generated, by discrete events, the sale of a product, the shipment of a supplier thing from a supplier, the fact that a product has been inventory has been received or a product has been produced, or a variety of different kinds of things that we have always used for many years in our business models. From that, we are talking about interactive data, which is a continuous stream of data as assets and products interact with not only one another, but also with customers. And so there is a whole new way of thinking about data that has come about. And it's not that we are not familiar with interactive data. If you think of any of our interactions with Amazon or Google or Uber or something, it's all interactive data. That is, we interact with their platforms. And through that, they get a continuous stream of data from us. So Barnes & Noble would get episodic data if you buy a book from their store. Amazon would get interactive data the entire time you're browsing on their website. So there's a difference between the two. And we are kind of familiar with that when we think about what the digital platforms do, okay? But for legacy firms to leverage that within their own business models, we are still kind of scratching the surface. Though it is possible today because of sensors and the Internet of Things, which is what I'm going to talk about very soon, okay? So consider this example, okay? Here's an inhaler, okay? An inhaler which we use as medication for a lot of respiratory diseases, say asthma. Many of us, probably most of us know somebody or the other who's got asthma, or we have kind of experience with that. So there is medication, and there are kind of two kinds of inhalers there. One is what we call the medication that you take on a prescribed basis at 2 doses, or two puffs twice a day, or 2 puffs once a day. And then there are these rescue inhalers, which is that if you get a sudden attack or something like that, you take it. And the way it works is that you have a canister, the medication is out there, you put the plunger on, and it has a mechanical counter which tells you there are 90 doses left or 89 doses left and so on. And then there's the smart inhaler, which has the ability now to interact with you. because it has a sensor and through Bluetooth and things like that. There is data that is continuously captured, and it's captured and with your smartphone. Okay. So now, what does the smart inhaler do? So there are some features which we call basic features. It will remind you to take your medicine, now, which is a big deal because studies show that the compliance of your dosage becomes much higher through these reminders. And also interestingly important for insurance companies that they would prefer something like that to make sure that they're paying for medication which people are using as opposed to not using. Then there are things like it can track the location, very important for rescue inhalers, which is that when you have an attack, you know where exactly the inhaler is. And it'll remind you if you're going out somewhere, it'll remind you to carry with you and things like that. Okay. Then there are some advanced features. The advanced features now can help predict acute attacks. Now, this is because of data that is now coming from more than what you are providing the inhaler. So this data can come through a variety of different sources, such as what is the pollen outside, or what is the dust outside, or what is the mold in your area, and so on and so forth. And it will start linking your likelihood of an attack with specific allergens. Here again, you see the artificial intelligence working in, all those kinds of technologies working. So now the question though is that which inhalers, what are the differences between the basic features and the advanced features? So if you look at the basic features, they're like the product features, which is that the attribute of the medicine does not change with the number of people using the medication. That is, whether it is just me or Ravi using it or 1 million people using it, the medicinal properties remain the same. Same thing with these basic features. That is, the ability to remind you of a medication or something like that remains the same. But when you think about the advanced features, we see network effects kicking in, which is that the value of the inhaler to me enhances with the number of people using the smart inhaler. Why? Because there's far more data that is coming in for the artificial intelligence engines to become more precise about the prediction, and also a lot more data coming in from external sources, which we call indirect network effects. That is, the more the entities in the environment that is participating in your platform, the greater it is. So then the next question again becomes that, okay, the advanced features seem to be much better. So what do you think the smart inhaler firms are today focused on? And you'll see they're still offering only basic features. And not only that, the adoption of smart inhalers is still less than 1%, despite the fact that they've been around for a lot of years. Now, the point I'm trying to make here is that, I'm just 1 second trying to move this panel here so that I can see. Yeah, sorry. The point I'm making is that there are the idea about interactive data is not necessarily all that very new. People understand that, but we are still not seeing a lot of evidence in terms of how these companies are using this in their business models. And this is because of a lot of different challenges that the book gets into a lot of detail on, but I will kind of refer to it, I'll kind of point out to it. But what I want to say here is, just give me 1 second. This the panel is kind of bothering me. 1 second. Just give me 1 second. There we go. The data per se is not new. Okay, we know data, we know the value of data for decades and decades. But the way we use it, particularly episodic data, is used to support products, support value chains. How well is my product doing? What is the efficiency of my value chain, and so on and so forth. And what we are seeing today is that there is this reversal of roles, which is that products can now support data, because products can become conduits to collect interactive data, which can be used in a variety of different ways. So it's a shift in how you think about the usage of data. And why is this interactive data so special as compared to episodic data? One is, of course, that it generates a very different class of insights. The ability to pinpoint the source of usage, for example. That is, the way I use a smart inhaler is different from how Ravi uses it or how Samina uses it. And the stream of data that comes, because it is pinpointed from a particular source, it can create very valuable user profiles. Now, it's not that episodic data could not do that, but we never used episodic data in that way. We tended to aggregate episodic data, which is to say that, what is the segment of users, or, which category of inhalers are selling in what region, or, what is the kind of price sensitivity of my inhaler. Those things are the kind of usage of data largely was around aggregates as opposed to individuals. And in part, it is also because that episodic data is also that you did not see the value so much of pinpointing the source of that data. You saw more value in terms of putting it as an aggregate. But the other important thing about interactive data is that it has a real-time element, and it has what I call an after-the-fact element. Same thing with episodic data, but in episodic data, you don't really use the real-time element. That is, the moment, say, a cash register says that there is a sale, you say, okay, there's real time, but I don't use it in real time. I use it only after the fact, and typically aggregate that for analysis. With interactive data, and this is what the digital natives have shown through their platforms, that there is value in sharing it in real time. So in fact, with Uber and all these kinds of digital platforms, the value, you necessarily have to share it in real time. So you understand the value of sharing it in real time. And why can you share it in real time? In part is because the real time aspect of value is transient. The value is there only in that real time. You can't share it later. Let me give an example. Say, my daughter, a young girl, she is waiting for an Uber late at night in an unsafe neighborhood. So Uber knows in real time that this is the situation. Now, Uber can share this data with an external third-party entity like an app developer, who comes up with an app where my daughter can designate 2 or 3 people who, like me or my wife, where a text comes in saying that your daughter is waiting for a car or for a ride. The ride has come. She's in the ride. She's reached there. So there's a safety feature that comes out of it by sharing that real-time data with external entities. Now, Uber will not necessarily share the profile that it has created about my daughter because of repeated usage, but because that has competitive implications. Now, what you see with interactive data as compared to episodic data with legacy firms is that because all the data is generally data that is aggregated and kept after the fact, you don't share any of it with external entities. You share very little of it even internal to the firm, you don't share it all that very much, right? There are all kinds of silos and stuff. But if you think of, say, Caterpillar, in the same kind of equivalent example with Uber, that it is digging and the sensors tell the machine that it has finished digging at this particular point. In that real time, you can share that data with, say, a concrete pourer who comes in next in line and starts working on the projects. So you can create this kind of a sharing environment wherein you're sharing the real-time data, and the value is transient because the value disappears unless it is shared in real time. There's no point in an app developer sending me a text saying that your daughter took a ride 3 days back or whatever it is and reached safely. In the same way, for Caterpillar, that particular value of sharing data happens only in real time. And it can later on, put aggregate that data and say that my machine is this productive or that productive, or I could do this, which data they may not decide to share, right? So there is this ability to share interactive data that episodic data did not have. And because of sharing that kind of data, you can create new digital experiences. So the fact that you can use data differently starts bringing in a different notion that products need not be my only revenue generators. That if I get interactive data, I can use that as a parallel generator of revenue. And maybe in certain circumstances, the value of that data can rise exponentially at a far different rate than what the value of your product can give you. So one is based on scale-based concepts. The other is based on network effects-based concepts, which are very different in how you deal with them. So interactive data is different, and they can come clearly from assets, your value chain assets, but they can also come from products. And as we'll go further in the talk, I'll tell you why it is significant to understand the difference between the two. That is, interactive data from products and user interaction has a different kind of value, and which is a new kind of value that episodic data did not give you. And it is possible only through interactive data. And why is it so challenging? And we're going back to the smart inhaler thing in terms of why is that the adoption rate is so low. Firstly, the data that you're getting from assets is easier because assets don't complain. You can put any kind of sensors on all your machines. They'll give you whatever data you want, but customers do. And getting interactive data from customers is not easy. Partly because the value of data-driven features is not very obvious ex ante. I can tell you the properties of the inhaler in terms of its medication. And I can even tell you maybe, because of, reminders and things like that. But even then you would start, why should I don't need reminders. Even more difficult to show the value of the predictive ability for an attack, because it's a function of the data that you have already generated. And so it's only after a lot of usage that the data comes in full, the value of the data becomes more obvious. And because of that, you need very different kinds of business models, which the digital platforms have done brilliantly, right? By giving basic features of a platform free and then finding ways to subsidize different kinds of sides of a platform by charging one side and subsidizing the other side. But how do you do it with smart inhalers is a challenge, because what the companies have done is essentially used these standard ways of pricing, saying the sensor costs $200, I'm going to charge $250. So the price of the inhaler becomes about twice what it is as a standard inhaler. And the value of that data is not very obvious. And so, the natural kind of resistance in the market to get it ongoing. Okay. So what are the strategic implications? First of all, that there are new kinds of business models possible. So if you think of, say, insurance, the traditional is again all data-based, but it's all episodic data, aggregated data to have average risk, calculation of average risk, and calculate profitable policies. Whereas with interactive data, you can start pinpointing risk. You can even start averting risk. And the thinking going on now with insurance companies is to shift business models from compensating loss to actually avoiding loss. And even if the loss occurs, to connect you with a variety of different third-party elements who could come and fix what is wrong. So it's a big shift in business models that are likely to happen as we go with more and more interactive data coming, right? And for us, in terms of strategy scholars, also there are new ways of thinking about, what are the new ideas that will come because of that. I'm just giving a couple of examples. Who are digital customers? Digital customers are those who give you interactive data. For all the digital platforms, all their customers are digital customers. For legacy firms, all the customers are regular customers, at least to begin with. How do you migrate your regular customers to digital customers? How do you, show the value of interactive data? How do you do pricing? How do you do positioning? Everything changes. who are digital competitors. So if you're competing with products, your traditional rivals, we all know, these are people who compete with similar products. If you're competing with data, they are companies who have similar data, and they need not be companies who have similar products. So if I'm a light bulb company and I've got sensor data on motion, and I want to get into the security business because I can make out when there are people when they're not supposed to be there or whatever, that same data is available to a whole bunch of other class of companies. It could be Nest, it could be Alexa, it could be camera companies, it could be furniture companies, a whole slew of companies possible who are all competing with the same data for that service. So how you think about competitive dynamics and how this is different from what we understood it to be within industry structures is something to think about. And these are some of the kind of articles that I'm working on and that they're in the pipeline that are coming out. Okay, so input 2 is about digital ecosystems. And why is it? Because we understand how industry structure can amplify the value of products. But if you're competing with data, industries don't do much to amplify the value of data. If you want to amplify the value of data, you need digital ecosystems. And we define this as networks of data generators and recipients. And so the bigger that network, the more you can amplify the value of data. And we know this from digital platforms. Again, you have drivers, you have riders, you have traffic data, you have if you're going into Uber, there are a variety of different platform users like airline check-in or restaurant check-in, the variety of things you can do by sharing the interactive data that Uber gets. So this we understand, and digital ecosystems are kind of part and parcel of most digital platforms because they operate based on generating and sharing data. And it's also kind of obvious that the more rich the number of recipients and generators of data are, the more powerful their digital ecosystems. The question is, how does it apply to industry incumbents who generally operate within industries? So I'm going to start with we're going to start with the industry network and then start showing how that industry network can turn into a digital ecosystem. And the significance of this is this thought that when we are talking about digital strategy for legacy firms, we are not talking about throwing away what we know about product-based and value chain-based and industry structure-based understanding of competitive strategy. They are the foundations on which you can build a new source of competitive advantage. But you want to understand what that outer casing is, right? These are in some ways, these are the scaffoldings on which you're going to create a new structure that goes beyond your old prevailing models of competitive strategy. And for that, it's useful to begin understanding what the industry network is. So on the left-hand side, I don't have to say much. The value chain, you can think of it as a network. A lot of studies have shown, shown ecosystems as these value chains. Many studies for airline manufacturers and so on. There's a pretty complex ecosystem in terms of how they produce and sell. And that's the value chain part. And I'm taking Ford's example to kind of demonstrate that. Now, after Ford sells its cars, there's a whole other network which we understand as complementers. And this is also not fundamentally new. We understand complementarities, but if you look at the primary business models of most industrial legacy firms, that the focus is primarily on the value chain, which is that Ford is not really concerned about setting up gas stations, or particularly in established industries. I'm a light bulb manufacturer. I don't get into the issue of sockets and wiring and electricity, which are critical complements to having the light bulb function. So here you have roads and highways and independent service providers and so on and so forth, which is a network that has evolved outside the scope of what Ford or many of the auto companies do. And that's the other side of the network. So then let's start with one side first, the value chain. And I'm going to take you to 1903. That's when Ford began. And we had this value chain, kind of, but we had no computers. There's nothing digital about it, right? I call it a raw value chain network. Okay, 1970s, you have IT systems coming in. And you saw how this value chain network started getting to become a network that generated and shared data. But these IT systems were largely, for lack of better words, siloed. And even today, a lot of companies complain that the one system doesn't talk to the other system. A lot of developments have happened. Obviously, there are ERP systems, SAP and Oracle have come and tried to kind of integrate things. But even then, they're largely straitjacketed in their applications, which is that within certain parameters, the software will allow you to integrate. And if you are a Ford manager, you are sitting in Brazil, your dashboard might give you an overarching view of certain kinds of questions that you might want to ask because of how data is shared and generated and shared and so on. Okay. And now, of course, with modern technologies, there is a huge ramp up in terms of how this value chain network can operate as what I call, it'll take a little while for this to come in, I think, 1 second. Yeah, it's coming in. The next slide. What I call production ecosystems. That is now, first of all, there is far more flexibility in capturing data from a whole variety of assets and from products. And what we are seeing is that this shift from a raw value chain network to one with information technology, where there was a big improvement in operational efficiencies because we automated a lot of manual tasks. From there, now we are going to a position wherein you can, from your value chain, also get data-driven services. You also see the role of AI. In fact, I thought there was a very, very nice article by Eric Brynjolfsson and Andrew McAfee in, I think it was 2017 or 2018, Harvard Business Review, talking about the business of AI. And what I thought was very interesting was how they differentiated between traditional software and AI. So when you are doing traditional software, the kind of things that SAP and Oracle and all would do, you code software based on explicit instructions. That is, you got to explicitly know what you want to tell the system, and only then you can design or code that software. With AI, things change because you're giving them one set of data and training data and one set of right outcomes. So facial recognition, you'll give them all kinds of faces, like human faces and puppies' faces and muffins and all kinds of things. And then there's data which tells them this is right, this is wrong. And the system learns. Now, because of that, you don't have to explicitly tell them a variety of different things. In fact, it's a lot of tacit knowledge that comes in out here. So because of these things, the kind of things that the value chain network can do is exponentially increasing. And I describe this as 3 tiers, and I'll describe that, I'll get into the significance of that a little later. But the first tier is when your interactive data is coming from assets, right? Ford having augmented reality, virtual reality to inspect paint and figure out and improve the efficiencies of quality control. The second tier is when the data is coming from products. So Caterpillar, for example, because of connected products, could say that they have a product called Motor Grader, which is supposed to level dirt. And they found that actually, it's not leveling dirt so much, it is leveling lighter gravel. So they could come up with a new product, which was essentially using different kinds of material, more cost effective, higher margins. But the point is that they could improve their R&D and product development efficiencies because they were getting pinpointed and very accurate data. It's like Nike knowing that I'm I bought a running shoe, but I use it only for walking. And I would never tell them that in a focus group. I would always say I run 5 miles a day or whatever. But anyway, so there is that. And that's the second tier wherein you're getting data from products now, which is more difficult, but you're still using it for internal efficiencies, which is product development or R&D. The third is when you're using that kind of interactive data for new services, data-driven services. And that's things like predictive maintenance and so on. We all know the famous GE example of jet engines, wherein through data, they can tell you how to fly the plane and help you save fuel efficiencies. And that becomes a source of revenue generation, right? So there are 3 tiers of value that production ecosystems can give you. That is moving from a value chain network to a production ecosystem. And the other side, traditional complementers, same way, no connectivity, plus connectivity, that your car tells you where you're running low on gas, tells you where the gas station is, you're running low on air, it tells you where the nearest repair shop is, traffic data, all those kinds of things. But more interestingly, so much more because of more and more assets getting connected. So I can be in Ford, I can tell Alexa I want coffee, a message goes to Starbucks, it knows what coffee, exact coffee, what I want, knows my expected time of arrival, piping hot coffee is kept ready. I come out of the car, pick it up, walk away, the payment is made automatically, all those kinds of things. And the more such retailers come into the system, or more such connected assets come to the system, the more this network grows. And I call this the consumption ecosystem. And the difference between the two is that one is evolving from your existing value chain network or assets. The other is new. You don't really control it, but it is evolving and it is there. And it's a new source of value. The other thing is that if you want to operate in this consumption ecosystem, you cannot operate through your value chain. You have to extend your value chain into a digital platform, by which I mean a business model that facilitates exchanges. So we know this, right? The value chain model is a kind of a pipeline model based on other people's work. That is, you are producing and selling. Whereas a platform, or particularly a digital platform model, is a business model that facilitates exchanges among multiple parties, just the way Uber does. Ford starts operating as a digital platform. Okay, and I call this a tethered digital platform, which is a separate part of work. That is, the difference between a standalone platform like Uber and Ford is that Ford's platform is a function and it builds on the data that Ford can collect through its products. Whereas Uber or Amazon, they start from scratch and think about what kind of platform service they want and facilitate that. Here, if I'm a toothbrush company, I've got to figure out, can I become a platform? If I'm a medical device company, I have to figure out, can I become a platform? And this work essentially goes into that, right? So to kind of wrap this digital ecosystems part, that what are digital ecosystems? I call it a combination of production and consumption ecosystems. And also this consumption ecosystem is the 4th tier of what I call digital transformation, wherein it's the biggest challenge, where legacy firms, first of all, largely don't notice that they have a consumption ecosystem. And second of all, they don't know how to take value from the consumption ecosystems because they're unfamiliar about how to manage digital platforms. So that is the digital ecosystems part. And based on that, you can think of a framework for competitive strategy, which is a combination of production and consumption ecosystems. And you can have a whole range of strategic options to unlock the value of data. You can stay in the first tier and say that I'm largely going to work on my assets and operational efficiencies. I can move into the second tier, wherein I can start getting data from my users and products and still focus only on operational efficiencies. I can get into the third tier, wherein I can generate data-driven services. And then I can get to the 4th tier, wherein I also operate as a platform. So what I think the future of competitive strategy is about figuring out how do you use your fundamental foundations of value chains and products and how do you evolve it into a digital ecosystem wherein you can think of how do you want to get additional sources of competitive advantage beyond what you did with your products and value chains. And notice in this also that you are not the only company thinking about this. There are others also. There are digital competitors who are coming in, and you got to figure out these choices vis-a-vis what is the threat of not doing one or the other, right? Which is that how do you move across these tiers? What is feasible for you? What would create a problem for you if you did not do it? You may not have a choice, and you have to figure out a way in which you can walk through these or take your company through these 4 tiers. And so you would have questions like, what are the contingencies that determine which tier I should be in? And also, how do I position myself in these digital ecosystems? A very different question from positioning yourself within an industry structure. And I'm not going to go into a lot of detail here, but I'm just throwing this as an idea that you have these different choices. You can have a huge focus on just production ecosystems, or you can have a focus on consumption ecosystems, or you can have a combination. But what it tells you is that there is a frontier that is possible to leverage the new value of data. And the book goes into a lot of detail in terms of what these options are and how do you kind of manage them and what are the contingencies there. And notice there are digital competitors who are also determining what that frontier could be for you. And a lot of your choices in terms of positioning will come in terms of how you determine where you want to play in terms of what you want to do. So I think that's the very high level kind of look at the ideas of the book. And I think I'm kind of done with the 40 minutes that you gave me, Ravi. So open for questions.
Thank you, Mohan. Do you want to continue sharing the slides?
No, I will stop the sharing.
Okay. But if you need to go back at any point, please feel free.
Not a problem.
I see a question from Stephen Ford and also one from Samina. Samina, take it away, please. Unmute.
You're still on mute, Samina. There we go. Yeah.
Now you can hear me. Sorry. So Mohan, I really like this. In the chat, what I put is the way I absorbed what you were talking about of production ecosystems as being ones that firms used more to benefit themselves to some extent, whereas the consumption ecosystem, where the network effects kick in, complementers, the idea of a platform of connectivity between different stakeholders, and then you can be creating value for those beyond the firm. And I guess my question was, and you kind of ended right there as I was typing in my question of your 2x2 of this kind of this productivity frontier idea of, do you see firms being able to succeed without having to be offering both and or engaged in both? So I guess I'd be curious. I know there's a whole book, and I'm going to go buy the book, but if you could give me a teaser onto which firms actually are still, you think, going to be doing well, still focused on the production ecosystem and maybe less so on the consumption.
Let me, that's a great question, Samina. Let me just go back to that 4-tier slide, right, to kind of answer that. So first of all, I will, just to, there's a nuance there which I just wanted to bring in. When you characterize the production ecosystem as value for the firm and consumption ecosystem as value for others, I wouldn't necessarily say that. There is value for the firm all through. It is what assets are you leveraging? So in the production ecosystems, you're kind of leveraging your value chain assets and either using data only from your assets or from products and users, but you're using it for driving value largely from the internal parts of your firm. So if GE is generating or giving a a service of saying that I will tell you how to fly your planes more efficiently. It is coming from one of their value chain or multiple value chain entities. Okay. But if GE tomorrow says that, hey, you know what, I can give a service wherein when you are sitting in a flight and you know that your connecting flight, you missed it because of whatever reason, I can give you your boarding pass, your hotel voucher, your taxi voucher in the flight so that you don't have the hassles of running around in the airport to try to make those connections. That is moving beyond its value chain into facilitating exchanges between other jet engines, airports, traffic control, a whole variety of things that are not part of the value chain. So that is the difference, right, between the production and consumption ecosystems. One is necessarily requiring you to operate as a platform. The other allows you to operate as a value chain. But the difference is that you're using data at various levels. So you can still generate services and revenue from data, but that's tier 3. Now, the second question is that should everybody be on the 4 tiers? No, absolutely not. Right. And so if I take, say, oil and gas, now oil and gas is not a product where you can immediately think of getting interactive data from products and users. It's very hard. It's all tier 1. And by the way, they're spending millions and millions of dollars in trying to get a lot of operational efficiencies through things like AI, right? Where to drill, how to predict whether there's a leakage in any pipeline, how to maintain refinery assets. This is a huge thing. Very, very big thing. And it is great. I mean, that's where, and also the competitors that they'll get will be largely from there, right? In terms of they have to kind of see what Exxon is doing or what XYZ is doing and keep, that thing in parity. But you can get into tier 2 if you can get product user data, but it's not very obvious that you can generate services. So for example, P&G, right, with a diaper business, they have these CRM programs where they have websites that give you a lot of information on parenthood. So they'll create communities of, likely customers, existing customers, and then they track you in terms of who you are. And then they start micro-targeting ads to you. That's tier 2. Now, for them, that is fine, right? And now if I'm in a consumer packaged goods company, it's unlikely that I can drive data-driven services, but I need to be very good at tier 2. Okay, and also that way, right? And so if you are a Peloton, you've gone into tier 4. Now, if the question for Schwinn is, should I do it or should I not do it? Okay, so those are the kind of questions one has to ask, because, and by the way, the network effects part is there all through. It's not just with platforms, because if I have artificial intelligence in this, the more data I get, the more valuable it is, right? So when you are in tier 3 or even in tier 2, if P&G has 1 million customers on its CRM programs, it gets more insight than, say, a competitor who has got only 10,000 on their website. So the how network effects is of value can depend on the context. So yes, thank you for offering to buy the book. I mean, so a lot of it is there, right? So this framework allows us to, in many ways, apply what we know with the digital platforms, but see it through the eyes of legacy firms.
Thank you. That really helped me clarify this slide. I think I must have, it went by and I didn't, but this is very useful. And like you said, the network effects permeate through, and the value to the firm permeates through, regardless of where you are in this staging, right? Thank you.
Mohan, there's a question from Stephen Ford. He asks, established companies have trouble making conceptual change like this because they are so invested in current processes. Which ones do you think are the effective movers?
Can I slightly tweak that question, Ravi?
Sure, go ahead, Steve.
Based on what Samina just asked. organizations I see taking on new big concepts, big it challenges all the invested capital they have in certain processes. So where would you see the change coming from? If this is appropriate for an organization, a well-established organization, what's going to drive the process? Is this going to come out of marketing? Is this going to come from the top of the house? Is it even the board of directors that's going to push them to change? What's going to drive this change so that people are willing to give up processes that they have now and significantly change how they think about their market?
That's a great question, Stephen. And I also know it's very significant, but I think I would, it's a complex question too, but I would be comfortable in saying that this kind of change comes from the top. This is too significant a change for it to, permeate up in, because it is pretty comprehensive in terms of how the philosophy of thinking about what are the drivers of competitive advantage. So that's something that I would say. The other part of the question that, change is always hard. We have known that for hundreds of years, right? There is that we know. This is also a change. So is it a change of a different category, or is the difficulty of change any different? I'm not very sure. But I would say this, that the urgency for change will come when people see either that they are leaving money on the table and walking away, or that competitors are coming in big ways to kind of, disrupt them. And notice that here, digital competitors come in all forms. Some competitors, sometimes, with banks in China, for instance, Alibaba and Tencent have taken about 40 to 50% of market share in small and medium enterprise and individual consumer loans and deposits. Now, and they could do it for a variety of reasons in the Chinese context, not yet happened here. But I could tell you this, that if regulations change, and if Facebook and Amazon or Google decide to get into banking, you will see Bank of America changing in a big, big hurry. Okay, so that is one. And the other thing also, I believe, and this is in some ways, I'm not saying this as a plug for my book or anything, but I do believe that it is important to get the conceptual thinking right first. I think the trouble with digital and digital transformation is that any application of any digital technology is today termed as digital transformation. I get into cloud services, digital transformation. I put some AI somewhere in my business process, digital transformation. If you have that kind of thinking, it's very difficult to bring comprehensive change. And one of the things that I've tried to do in this book is to give that kind of thinking and framework. It's saying that we know this from the natives. The proof of concept is there. We know our foundations. We understand that very well, like value chain networks and complementarities. It's just a question of evolving from those foundations into this. If you have that clarity, in the same way you have clarity about mergers and acquisitions or alliances or any of these kinds of things, today we don't question, right? Should I merge or not merge? Those questions are answered. We have lots of ways to analyze it. But which tier of digital transformation should I be in? I don't think we have answers for that, right? So conceptual clarity as a beginning, top management support, absolutely vital. And then the ability to take some risks. And you can be a pioneer or you can be a follower, right? So those are the choices you have.
Thank you.
Mohan, there's a question from Hasmukh.
Yes.
I'm going to ask it on your behalf, but if you're there, you'd like to jump in, you can also ask it yourself. What would startup companies look like? What kinds of resources in terms of talent, time, and capital would you need to pull off this kind of transformation? Right.
So see, this is, again, great, right? So as a startup, you can experiment far more. So a lot of startups have been successful in the last few years. We all know them as unicorns and whatever. Because they have come into, blank spaces with ideas about platforms and things. So we have seen a lot of that. With the legacy firms, there is a slight complication because to get into this space, sometimes you might need that foundation of a large number of products. So you have to piggyback on something. So for startups, it's a little more challenging in some ways to get into this space. At the same time, if legacy firms are inert and they are not acting on it, they can come in. And you can see lots of companies coming in a variety of different ways. So Hilti, for instance, is a company that makes construction tools. So what they have been thinking is, our tools cost about $35,000, $40,000. And we are getting a lot of attack from cheaper producers, manufacturers. So let's get into data. And so they have started these services of telling you where a tool is at any particular time, with the assumption that you may lose more money by not finding the right tool in time than the cost of the tool itself. But you notice that it's easy for startups to come in that kind of arena by just putting retrofitted sensors. So I can come to competitors. I can come in as a competitor. We go to Hilti's customers and say, not just Hilti, you can have a whole variety of different construction tools, and I'll come in and say that I can do that. Now you see, the attack is coming in some ways from the consumption ecosystems. Or I can say that I can connect your construction tool with a variety of different activities that are happening in the construction area. And in the construction space, there are lots of new entrants coming in as startups. So there are lots of opportunities. Again, it's a question of finding the most appropriate opening. And it can come because of recognizing that what are the things that are strong at. They have a base, they have a foundation. Nike, for example, has a huge advantage if it wants to get into, sensor-equipped shoes and services, if it wants to, because it's got a huge footprint. But at the same time, if I'm a startup and if I can find a way to piggyback on Nike and Nike's position to do things, I could do that too. So it would depend on how you think about the value, how you think about your attack, how do you think about value generation and use your resources?
Thank you. If anyone has any questions, please you can raise your hand, or you can type in your question on chat. Mohan, I'm wondering, as you're describing, from the perspective of an existing incumbent, getting into these additional parts of the value chain, or call it digital ecosystem. By definition, ecosystem is connecting you with many other players, as you said, in the platform for exchange. So I'm wondering, any one of those players could also create a platform for exchange. So are we going to end up with a world with so many platforms? Like, I'm already sensing that, sometimes my restaurant wants me to join their network, and then some toast wants me to join a network. I mean, am I going to get then inundated with a whole bunch of networks that I have to join? And if that happens, you have competition among platforms and networks. Do you have any sense of which will prevail and why?
Yes, great question. So in part, there is the article that I mentioned on tethered digital platforms kind of goes into that. But let me show this slide, for instance, right? A little kind of captures a little bit about that article. Is that as platforms, you have a variety of options. I could be a supplier to a platform. I'm Miele, my dishwashers, and I can't think of what I want to do with my data. I don't have the wherewithals to become a platform. I can just connect with Alexa. And note here, again, network effects comes in, that just like we had the concept of scale in the industrial era, where we could have argued that, why don't we have 1,000 auto companies? And we say, not possible because scale intensive, and so on and so forth. Here again, you're noticing that platform businesses are very network effects oriented. That is, you don't see multiple platforms. So a few players are able to manage and congregate and take a variety of that. And I hate to use winner take all as a phrase because I don't believe in it so much, but you do see that effect, right? Similar to how scale had an effect. So you could have a full tethered platform wherein you control it. Now, autos is an interesting example. If you think of Ford trying to get into becoming a tethered platform, and they're doing it, by the way, the Alexa and Starbucks story I said is true. Now, you can say Alexa also has a platform, but in the auto case, Alexa becomes a supplier to Ford. Whereas in the Miele case, Miele becomes a supplier to Alexa. So the way these platforms will gravitate, that's one. Second, today, there are some 17 or 18 auto companies, I think, that account for about 65% of the world market share. This is coming from one of my earlier studies on multi-market contact and all that. So where we studied the auto industry. But in the new world, if you're thinking of the world evolving into a platform-based business wherein autonomous cars come and they give you deals of, just like you have mobile firms giving you a data plan, you could have a ride plan. You may own one car, but for a variety of different errands, a car comes, picks you up and drops you, or drops your daughter off, or drops your son off somewhere, or those kinds of things are possible. They're not very far away. Now, in that scenario, can you have 100 platforms or 17 platforms? Probably not. You may have 2 or 3 major platforms, because the huge network effects in terms of how much do they know about you. I would rather go to a platform that knows my taste in music, what kind of news I want to listen to. They know what my taste of coffee is and where my, what my errands are, what my itinerary is. And that's where you have the advantage of a company like Google, where they have multiple interfaces to get to know who you are. Ford knows you only from the car. Google knows you from a variety of other interfaces. You notice that between Facebook and Google also, incidentally, that Facebook's advertising income has taken a bigger hit because of Apple's privacy policies. Google's has not, partly because Google has far more interfaces to know you for their advertising business than what Facebook has. So coming back to this, right, the number of platforms that might exist and things, it again depend on the context of how powerful the production ecosystems are when it is connected to that, or who are the digital competitors. What kind of data do they have? What kind of data can they get? Do they have an advantage over you? Just like in the old business, you would say that XYZ has an advantage of scale over me. There are advantages of network effects that somebody will have over you. So the idea is to get the framework right, and then you can apply these questions just like we did in the old world, wherein once we had the framework of industry structure and value chains, we could answer a lot of questions in terms of, can I compete here or can I not compete here, and what should I do and what should I not do? So the book is trying to kind of give a similar kind of framework as what we understood from the industrial world.
Great, thank you. So you're not saying that every platform involves a winner take all, but sometimes it does. So at least you can think about, in your case, whether you're in a situation where it's a winner take all type of situation, or it's going to be actually competing on multiple platforms.
With smart inhalers, I could think of 4 or 5 companies dominating the market. Toothbrushes, Oral-B and all, they have all started this, which is they're still in the production ecosystems now. That is, you can have smart toothbrushes which tell you how well you are brushing and things. It's a matter of time before they go into consumption ecosystems by linking you to dentists or insurance companies and so on. But I can imagine, first of all, unlikely to find new competitors coming into that space. Why? Because the data that the toothbrush can get, you cannot get through any other product. Right? So you necessarily have to be a toothbrush manufacturer. So Oral-B, and they have a natural advantage. And second of all, the multi-homing, right? If Oral-B is able to get 1,000 dentists, Hum will also get that. Sonicare will also get that. You can visualize a scenario wherein you'll see a competitive equilibrium with these firms, provided they follow these principles in some ways, or they kind of logically arrive at thinking that this is the way we should go. But in other cases, it may be very different. In banking, groceries, I think you will see fundamental changes in groceries. I don't know if you use Instacart. Think about it. They have first-party data on you. To me, it's a miracle that they still are continuing to ship groceries from, Whole Food, not Whole Foods, but Market Basket or Star Market or whatever. It's a matter of time before they get into their own warehouses, right? I mean, what is the big deal in the relative difficulty in setting up a supply chain for groceries versus the relative difficulty of getting a network of million+ users on whom you have data? So you can predict in some ways with some probability that this is an area where if you don't get your act together, you're just going to be a supplier to Instacart in terms of a platform. There's no way you can survive with expensive real estate when your groceries are coming from a warehouse.
Great. Yep. I'm watching the clock here. We have about 7 minutes, and I see a question from Bala Chakravarti and another one from Sabina. Bala, if you're there, would you like to ask the question yourself? No? Okay.
By the way, a great talk, Mohan. Appreciate.
Thank you.
Simple question. Maybe I've been not fully into the framework that you're talking about. The old-fashioned view of core competencies were, things you have assets, tangible, intangible, that are hard to procure, imitate, or substitute, and that gives you competitive advantage. What are the sources of competitive advantage for a tier 4 digitally transformed firm? And since we are talking about interactive data, is the advantage likely to be ephemeral by definition? So we are constantly fighting. There'll be winners and losers, and there will not be built to last kind of story in the new world.
That's a great question, Bala. And by the way, pleasure, Bala, to hear from you. See, the fundamental notion of what you're talking about is that if I have some unique resource and if it is difficult for others to imitate, and that the whole resource-based view argument and the core competence argument, that doesn't change. It's about what assets and what drives that, and the nature in some ways of, so even in the old world, if you had certain assets where they were scale intensive and things, and they were difficult to replicate for others, here the data part probably is a little different because its value grows over time. That is, if today, think of it that if you, even when Netflix first came around, right, and started attacking Blockbuster, for Blockbuster to get to what Netflix was, partly you could argue that, they had to get the same number of warehouses or whatever it is, which are the assets. But more important was that unless you had 10 million subscribers, you would not get the kind of precision in terms of recommending movies. You would not get so many independent movie producers to come into your platform by which you could give a whole range of different recommendations. So the nature of what drives your competitive advantage changes because what resource is important is different, and the resource behaves differently from the older resources. So in some level, it is easy to say, yeah, data is your new resource, but it's a very nuanced kind of understanding that is required to show what kind of data, when does it become an advantage, what should you do to nurture that data, how does it work in the digital ecosystems, how do you amplify the value of the data in your digital ecosystems. Those become the new set of questions to answer the old, or not to answer, but under the broad umbrella of that thinking that there is something that is a core resource that you need to develop. So just if I just add to that, think of Domino's, for instance, that unlike a lot of franchises and restaurants, even way early, Domino's decided that they were going to focus on delivery also. Now, they did it for a variety of reasons at that time. But during the COVID, you could see the stark difference that decision made, because they were one of few restaurateurs who had first-party data on their users because they controlled that part. So in the old world, you could have argued that, our core competence is just making pizzas. Delivery is not our core competence. But now delivery became a source of first-party or interactive data. Now that is now far more important than what the old resources were. So I don't know if that answers the question. It's a very deep question.
Yes, it does in part, but you made a very useful distinction between episodic and interactive data. And that the value is in interactive data. Just because Domino's owns some episodic data should not give it competitive advantage going forward.
No, it owns the interactive data, right? It gets a lot of interactive data from you because it has changed the whole channel in terms of distribution, which is that now they get their data from how you order through Twitter or how you order through smart televisions or and they get a lot of interactive data from which, yeah.
So interactive data by definition would be real time, right? Not historic.
No, I'm sorry. See, if I again clarify that, interactive data has two parts. There's one, episodic data also has by definition, when the data is generated, it is real time. With episodic data, you don't use it in real time. You largely use it only after the fact in aggregated form. With interactive data, you do both. The real-time thing is when at that moment you share that data with some external third-party entities to create some other value. But after the fact, by definition, real-time data becomes after the fact, that you can store through and build individual profiles, which again, you don't do so much with episodic data. So, so Domino's has interactive data to know Bala's profile in terms of what Bala orders, when, why. That is all stored after the fact data profile. But in real time, it can do many things with interactive data too. It knows, for example, now they have these hotspots where you can order and get a pizza delivered without having an address. So there are things that they're doing differently. But the point I was making was that interactive data is possible because they made a decision about what their core competence was before all this was very clear. They said, no, delivery is also, many other companies said our core competence is only in making food, not in delivery. And by that, they lost access to that interactive data.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mohan. Samina does have a question, but I'm going to pose it, but maybe we'll have to take the response offline. And I'm going to use that question also to put a plug for your book, because Samina's question is, in your book, do you also discuss how firms will evaluate the costs and benefits of choosing to move across these different tiers? Not. And the answer, of course, is go buy the book. But you can give Samina privately an answer.
Yes.
I'm afraid our time is up.
It's gone. For the second book.
There you go. But Mohan, this has been terrific. I wish we had time to ask you how you think our business, the education business, might be affected by all this. We don't have time to get into it now, but the questions you've raised are so general, so broad, applicable, I think, to all organizations, and you've given us a lot to think about. I know you've been working on this for a number of years, and you've written a number of pieces in MIT Sloan Management, as well as Harvard Business Review, and now you have the book coming out. It's a body of work that's really helping to move our understanding of this important topic forward. And again, thank you so much for sharing it with us today and giving us a preview.
Thank you so much, Ravi. I mean, it's really, really a pleasure. You know how much I admire you. You've been my role model for me for many, many years. No, I'm being honest with you. I've always admired you, and I've known you from such a long time. When I came out of the doctorate program, I came to you, and we've known each other for so long. It's really, really a pleasure to interact with you, and it means a lot when you say these things about me.
Thank you. No, but it's great work. Keep up the great work. And wish you great success with the book.
Thank you.
And I hope you'll come back maybe in a year or two and do it again.
I'd be happy to.
You're learning a lot on this topic. companies, and as you talk about the book in other circles, I'm sure it'll lead to more great things. So thank you all, and thank you all for joining us today. Just to mention that we have some other events coming up. We have next week a very interesting topic on the future of the global supply chain with Spencer Fung, who's the executive chairman of Li & Fung. That is on the 15th, February the 15th in the morning, 8:30 to 9:30 a.m. And then on the 16th, we are launching our Africa business series. We're going to have 3 speakers, including the CFO of Safaricom, which is the pioneer of the M-Pesa payment system, is going to be on the program there on the 16th. And that will be from 8:30 to 11 in the morning. And on February 24th, we have the next speaker in our China lecture series, Jack Perkalski, who's going to be talking about the US-China relationship going forward. So I think all very interesting topics. Hope to see many of you there at that as well. Again, thank you all. Thank you, Mohan, again.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.